Finovate showcases cutting-edge banking and financial technology through a global conference series featuring short-form demos and thought leadership. Now, the conversation continues on the Finovate podcast.
Hi, welcome to the Finovate podcast. Joining me today, we have Aleks Svetski, the CEO and founder of Amber. Amber is a company that won Best of Show at Finovate Middle East 2019 in Dubai. And we're going to be talking to Aleks about Bitcoin a little bit today and Amber. So Aleks, can you start by just giving us a quick overview of Amber for people who haven't seen your video?
Hey Greg, thanks for having me on, man. Really briefly, Amber is a Bitcoin accumulation app, and I kind of really underscore accumulation because we're not like a trading app like a Coinbase or something like that. Our MO, our reason for existence is really to help people shift away from holding traditional, government-based currencies into long-term holding a non-government internet-based currency that's basically owned by the people. So Bitcoin is like a people's money, and we want to help people accumulate Bitcoin for the long term.
One of the things that I thought was really interesting watching your demo back there in Dubai, you guys are focused entirely on Bitcoin. You don't engage at all with Ether, Litecoin, et cetera, any of those other digital currencies. Can you talk more about why you've made that decision to focus exclusively on Bitcoin?
It basically ties into that first comment is, I'm personally anti-crypto, anti-blockchain. None of that stuff interests me. I think Bitcoin is a money reinvented. It's not a new technology. It's taken a bunch of old disparate technologies, combined them together, and delivered basically this concept of digital scarcity, which is a one-time event by definition. Digital scarcity will only happen once. And it's done it in a way where we've got a fixed supply monetary unit that is unconfiscatable, uninflatable, and incorruptible, that sits completely outside of central management and control. And by definition, that's happened once. That, without getting into anything too complex, it's Bitcoin's narrative and progression and emergence has been such that it is the only one that will function as this kind of currency, the founder disappearing and all that sort of stuff. So for us, wanting to help people, build long-term wealth in this new form of money, we will always only be focused on Bitcoin.
I always have appreciated Bitcoin for what it has done to sort of the concept of money as a whole. I thought it was a really interesting, when I first heard of it, I was like, this is a fascinating theoretical exercise, just what it means for the idea of money and who guarantees it. So I certainly agree with you on that front. I think it is just fascinating to watch how it has become a force in the world. And there are obviously people who view it differently, but I like the approach that you guys have where you look at it as the people's money, as you said earlier. I think it is really interesting to look at it from that standpoint. Now, obviously, we met in preparation for Finovate Middle East back in November. A huge amount has happened in the world since November 2019. That's a sort of an understatement, right?
Just a touch, yeah.
Let's talk specifically about what's been going on with Bitcoin since then. I mean, Bitcoin is making a play for best performing asset of the year so far. The upcoming halving event could play a big part in driving its value upwards. And I guess maybe the place we should start is just to talk about that halving event in more detail for people who don't know what that is or what it means. Can you give us an overview of what that means and what exactly it will do to Bitcoin?
Yeah, so Bitcoin is what's known as it is the only fixed supply asset in the world, really, that we know of. So everything in the world basically is priced based on supply demand at its very basic level. And Bitcoin as a form of money is fixed in supply, meaning there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin in total. Now, its issuance is predetermined by the core Bitcoin software. And what that means is every time a new block is generated, there is an amount of Bitcoin that is rewarded to what's called a miner or a validator. So that begun with 50 Bitcoin every 10 minutes. And after the first epoch, which is a 4-year period, it halved down to 25. And then after the next 4 years, it halved down to 12 and a half. And that's the epoch we're in now. On May 8th or 9th, which is a couple of days away, it'll halve again. I think it's block number 655,000 or whatever it is, whatever block number it is. It'll halve again to 6.25. So basically what's happening is the supply of new Bitcoin is constricting and it halves every 4 years. And that'll continue to happen until Bitcoin asymptotically approaches its fixed supply cap, which is 21 million. And the result of that, when you're constricting supply and you've got, new capital flowing in, looking to acquire an asset that is, unconfiscatable, uninflatable, incorruptible, and not able to be controlled by anyone, all that sort of those attributes that people want in a money, you basically got, the same amount or more dollars chasing less Bitcoin. So it starts to apply upward pressure. And to sort of answer the original question about, what we've seen with Bitcoin since we caught up in November is that, it was the best performing asset of last year. It was the best, shaping up to be the best performing asset of this year. It's the best performing asset of the last 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 9 years, 10 years. It is the best performing asset we've ever had in history. And that just continues. And, what we'll see with this halving is just more upward pressure as this, money reimagined continues to attract more interest. And it's a fascinating thing.
Yeah, and I love the idea. So, I mean, obviously, the total amount of Bitcoin that ever will be available is fixed, but we are still getting more into the market in terms of what we can play with right now. And to have it sort of built in where every 4 years, the rate at which more Bitcoin enters the market gets cut in half is a really interesting idea. And there's an interesting piece of an article you wrote where when we get down to that last Bitcoin after it's been halved, X number of times, I don't even know, but you said that last Bitcoin will take something like 30 years to harvest because the rate will have slowed so dramatically by that point.
Correct, exactly. And then that just sort of like, if you kind of reverse extrapolate that and think that if Bitcoin succeeds to be, call it the internet of money, this free market-based money that is globally accessible to all, for a network of validators, i.e. miners, to make it economically feasible to mine a Bitcoin over 30 years, like for a whole network, you got to try and fathom what the value of Bitcoin would be at that stage. Now, we're talking 120 years away, but it's incredible.
Yeah, no, very much so. So one of the things that you mentioned in that article that you published recently is that, there are a lot of centralized governments who are doing things with their currencies right now. In the wake of the response to COVID-19, obviously global markets are in a point of recession, and various central governments are manipulating their currencies, either putting money out there through bailouts like they are in the United States, or just trying to adjust the currencies. Obviously, something like that is not possible with Bitcoin. And that's, I think, one of those pieces where it becomes really important for you. Can you expand on that and talk about why the sort of lack of a centralized regulator, somebody who can manipulate that currency, is so important for Bitcoin's potential for the future?
Yeah, so everything from biology to the universe to economics, these are known as what's called complex systems. So it's impossible to manage a complex system, from a central point. Complex systems all have their own interactions and they function as a whole. Now, what's interesting is, money is the mechanism through which the complex system of economy is able to find its own equilibrium. So money is the mechanism via which prices are transmitted, and that's how supply and demand is balanced. And a complex economy finds equilibrium. Now, in order for money to function properly, it should map directly to the two finite resources that we have, which is time and energy. When you and I perform work or add value in society, we trade our individual time and energy for some form of value, and then we trade that for a unit, which we collectively call money. And then we can store that unit, or we can exchange that unit at a future date, or we use that unit to measure how much wealth we have, which is again a function of our time, effort, and the value we create. Now, Bitcoin again is perfect in this sense because it's fixed supply, meaning it maps directly to time and energy. Whereas what we've got with government currencies is that money no longer maps to work, energy, and time. Money is this thing now which all of us idiots have to work for, whilst a few, cronies and central bankers in government and all that sort of stuff, they can just print it. They can just make it up out of thin air. And that basically distorts the economy, distorts society. It basically tears at the fabric of society. And what we've become accustomed to is every time a little bit of a so-called problem happens, which is really the system trying to correct itself, we push the big red button that says print, which is kind of like a heroin junkie, hitting themselves with more drugs just to feel better, and creating a bigger problem, which is more distortions in the system. So what I love about Bitcoin, and this is what all Bitcoiners have been talking about, since it came out, was that in order for society to function properly and an economy to function properly, you need a fixed supply of money that can't be messed with every time, something happens. And this whole COVID situation is just such a blatant, obvious marketing campaign for Bitcoin, really. It's that, hey, everyone here is printing and as a result devaluing all of our wealth because you and I are working and our wealth is being devalued when they print more money, whereas Bitcoin is fixed. It'll never betray the work that you've put in. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's really interesting. And it's one of those things where you can kind of forget about when everything is going well, right? In the past 10 years, where there's been a lot of economic growth, there hasn't been much currency manipulation on the part of central banks. And then when you do see something like this, where there is a big shock to the system, that is kind of one of the first levers that economists will tend to pull. And there are obviously valid and sound economic theory behind those decisions. But at the same time, it does have the effect of devaluing the currency, the very clear and obvious effect, an accepted effect of devaluing the currency, which can wreak havoc on people who are looking at that currency to maintain its value as a store of wealth. And obviously, Bitcoin is not possible to do that. So there is a lot that we could have covered here. And I would encourage you to, if you haven't already, anybody listening, I would encourage you to check out Amber's demo video from Finovate Middle East. You can find it at finovate.com/videos. Aleks, are there any other resources that you would point people towards if anybody's interested in learning more?
Absolutely. There's that article that you mentioned, the halving, which, if you chuck it in your show notes, because I don't know the URL off the top of my head. Otherwise, if people just type in my name, Aleks, Aleks, and then surname Svetski, Svetski, in Google, they'll find my Medium, and I do write a lot, and I explain the halving, I explain why Bitcoin matters, I do some educational pieces on money. I know I just did a debunking of Ray Dalio's latest chapter in his book Changing Worlds, so I kind of went after Dalio and some of what I think are his misconceptions about how money functions and what's really happening. So that would be where I'd suggest going.
Great. Well, and I think one of the cool things, you obviously have a very different perspective on this than a lot of people who talk about it. So I would encourage anybody listening to read some of Aleks's work, because there are a lot of interesting pieces in there. I've certainly found it to be insightful and enlightening. So again, Aleks, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. And I look forward to catching up with you again in the future as we see what happens with this halving event and what happens with the rest of 2020.
Brilliant. Thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me on.
The Finovate podcast is produced by Informa Connect in association with Provoke.fm Media. Check out Finovate.com for information on Finovate's upcoming shows and to learn how you can get involved. The discount code Finovate Podcast will save you 20% on tickets to all of our events. And you can email us at info@finovate.com for information on sponsoring, speaking, or demoing. Thanks for listening.